Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review 8-Bit Christmas. So, going into this film, I would have to say immediately, this film is very funny. I was laughing during most of this film. I thought that this film was really good and comical, and I think this movie might be much more for like an older audience, but like I think for because it kind of deals a lot with nostalgia, like it like really caters to a lot of nostalgia here, rather than it dealing with like a young audience that is to go on and understand what any of these references really are. But I think a whole family could probably enjoy this film. And like I of course like I knew about the original like Nintendo console thing. I used to play it when I used to go to my grandmother's house. And we used to play like Bubble Bobble and all kinds of stuff. Like Super Mario and all kinds of things. And so eventually going on and like upgrading consoles over time to get like Super Nintendos or Segas, or I think like Sega was kind of like during my time period where it's like I try to get like a lot of Segas, and I mostly got Sonics because that's basically all you could really get. Like you're like basically you couldn't get anything else but Sonic as far as the Sega thing is to go, because there wasn't much else out there, like, or there wasn't like much of quality out there for Sega stuff. So most of the time you would probably just get Sonic games because there wasn't anything else. But then eventually you got to the Nintendo 64s and so on and so forth. So like, and plus you were lucky to get like any kind of games once, like at most of the time you ended up getting the console first, and then it was like, okay, like we can just afford like one game, and you really just gotta play the crap out of that. And then eventually at some point gradually you'll get more games, because that's pretty much how game consoles still are, where you end up like luckily there's a lot of games that are that are to luckily be for free right now, like a Fortnite or something like that, where eventually like now there seems to be much more of an easier way to about going about things. But anyways, so this movie is funny. I do really enjoy it. It does kind of do a copy and paste kind of thing of several other kind of Christmas movies, because it forcibly has to do that, because every Christmas movie has to not be the most unique, beautiful snowflake that it always has to be. Like we do kind of get some kind of things here where it does kind of have familiar territory of a Jingle All the Way, or like the Arnold Schwarzenegger film, or it does have like a very much Christmas or the Christmas Carol kind of theme here. It also has like a Princess Bride kind of approach to it, where we have Neil Patrick Harris's character Jake, who's going to sit his daughter down and tell her this story about the time that he was going to try and get a Nintendo console. The only thing that I don't like about this movie is that like we kind of have an ending that either kind of feels sad or just kind of feels like, wait a minute, like like the whole movie was this one goal, and I'm looking at the like the timestamp of this movie, and I'm like, but wait a minute. So when are we gonna get to this goal? When is the goal going to happen? And then the goal technically happens off screen. And I'm like, what? Like, that's not a good enough payoff. But the real payoff is us to always remember that, like, it's not about the gift that you get from Christmas. It's just that you, like, get a Christmas. And that you get to be able to realize that you need to actually work for a gift that you are given, and so on and so forth. So going into this movie, I had a lot of fun with it, because at some point in time you can go through this movie and reflect on like you being like, oh, I did that one time. Like I went to one of my friend's house and like just played this console with them and so on and so forth. And like you can kind of like find a lot of moments where you're just like, oh yeah, I probably would have done that if I would have really wanted this thing so badly and had my like all my neighbors get together and figure out some goal of how to get this one gift. And so, and we don't actually have it from the parents' perspective, we have it from the kids' perspective. So it's not like Arnold Schwarzenegger Jingle All the Way, where it's like, oh, I have to get this, I have to get this action figure, this turbo for my kid. A little bit different in this movie. So, with that said, let's it's a really fun movie, even though the ending is just like, huh? But like, I really enjoyed it. It was like a fun approach to a film. It has nostalgic purposes, and like really, you probably have to have a kid that's probably to ask like, "Mommy, what's a Nintendo console?" And I don't know what this is. I don't know what Cabbage Patch dolls are. I don't know what any of this stuff. What is this story? I don't understand. And then so you might have to explain things to your kid. Like that's the only real problem that that parents will probably have when they have a movie like this, where they're like, "Hey, I want to see this movie," and then it's like, "Oh crap, I'm probably gonna have to explain a lot to this kid and how really like valuable these like certain things were at this point in time." So with that said, let's just go into that double five time territory. So I would recommend this movie because it's fun. It's funny. I laughed through most of the film, especially when we get to that one gaming display part. Like I would laugh so hard at that point because that was like really to me the only really funny part in this movie. But yeah, let's go out of our way to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we get to spoil this movie. So 8-Bit Christmas. So we start this film realizing that there, of course, is to always be one rich kid in a neighborhood. And so this rich kid is to basically use his like having a one of a kind thing and hold it against everyone. So a guy who I believe is named Timmy is to have a Nintendo, and he is to be the only one to be able to have had this Nintendo compared to everyone else. So Timmy goes on and is to pick 10 random kids every single day to go and watch on and see this Nintendo be played, because this kid is like, hey man, you should just be happy that you're even in this room watching me play this Nintendo. To where he's even just like, hey guys, want to play? And he's like, no. Like, this kid also has this like massive arcade game room of a thing where there's like pool tables, and there's this like weird like drink displayer of like Coke and pop and whatever and soda. And so like we have like this treasure trove of like this room of sorts. And so, but all that matters is this Nintendo with this 42-inch tube TV screen, where eventually we get them to re-reference about the 42-inch TV screen, and the one Doyle's dad is just saying, man, that's a big TV screen. And yeah, like, I was like, at first, when I saw like the TV screen in here, I'm like, is that a tube TV screen? Or is that a tube TV? Like, I actually thought that it was like a legitimate like flat screen that they couldn't get like like I was kind of like, were they gonna stick to the times here, or were they like not going to be able to find a tube TV? But luckily they found one that was like massive enough, and it doesn't look like a 42-inch TV screen to me. But so we have this massive tube TV screen that looks way bigger than it actually does on here. So Timmy goes on and is to eventually ask his friends, like, hey, do you guys all want Pop-Tarts? And so Timmy is to go on and like ask his mom, like, hey ma, like he goes on the intercom and he's like, hey ma, Pop-Tarts. And she's like, how many do you want? And so Timmy is to go and see the hands raised that all want the Pop-Tarts. And so Timmy's like, well, one. Like, this guy is such a douche. But when really looking at it, it's like, well, like, you should be lucky you're here kind of thing. So, like, we just have a lot of times where people are just like, man, that sounds like a really cool thing. But then they have to realize that they also have to go through the arduous process of, like, dealing with somebody that they probably don't want to deal with just to be able to see that cool thing. Or to be able to, you know, like, there's a lot of times where you just have a lot of people that have these like, hey man, like I have this unique thing, this unique collection of thing, and you're like, oh wow, like that does actually look like something that would interest me. Let me go and see it. And then you're like, oh man, like yeah, this is cool. But then you have also the person that's uh, like gloating about like, yeah, like it is really good, and I got all of it, and it was at a really cheap price, and this and like you're just like, hey man, you don't have to boast about it, but hey, it's a cool collection. It's a cool thing that you found all of this stuff because it's probably very rare, or it's very like you had to take a lot of time to get all that stuff. So because you always have that person that has that like clout or whatever. So anyways, we have this Timmy guy who of course is to play this Nintendo, and it seems like he's playing it really well. And that has Jake forcibly turn around and just be like, man, I want to get a Nintendo. Like, I need to get a Nintendo. And so, really, that starts out the journey of Jake desperately trying to figure out how he can get a Nintendo. Because the very beginning of this is to have Jake Doyle, who is to go off with his daughter Annie, because Jake is now an adult, and he's going to his grandmother's or his mother's for Christmas, and so he's bringing his daughter Annie along, and so evidently there's absolutely nothing to do at this grandmother's house, and so Jake is like, well, yeah, there is something to do. Like, we can play Nintendo. And Annie's like, really? Like, we're going to play Nintendo? Like, all right. Because Annie desperately wants a phone. And, like, the weird, goofy thing of it is Annie is to never get a phone by the end of this movie. She's just to, like, eventually realize that, like, again, like, maybe because you desperately really want something, like, that doesn't mean that you should actually get it, kind of thing. So she has to realize that, okay, well, because Annie is to go on and tell her father that it's like, yeah, I really need a phone, because if anything, Annie is to be sharing her phone with her father, and Annie is to mention that she's to get way more texts and way more calls than her own father does. And Jake's like, well, like, here's the phone for another text, here's the phone for another phone call. And so that's the main reason why Annie just wants her own phone, so that way she'll stop bugging her father about it, and so that way like she can get her own kind of like privacy without having to like go on and have to like bug her father and or have her friends text her about any number of things. So Jake then has to turn around and set his daughter down and tell her the story about the Nintendo. so that way she can understand like what he wanted for Christmas so badly was a Nintendo, and how Annie wants something so badly for Christmas, which is basically to just be having her own phone. So we then turn around and go back in time yet again for Jake to kind of tell us and regale us about certain things of his past, where eventually Jake is to have this one massive bully of a character named Josh, who is to always play King of the Mountain, and this guy is to be like the bully of the film, where this guy is to be this massive of a guy that has this like really long hair that is going through and always being the king of this mountain because he's pushing everybody off. Weirdly, like they end up saying that like they don't really realize how old this kid actually is, and like they don't really like. There's like, how is this kid so big, and how is it that we both share a same class together? And like this kid looks way older. Like this kid looks like he's almost in his like teen years, and whatever. So they of course always try to like knock this kid off, but it just never happens. And so we push on and have forcibly Jake, who has to go to school, and he is to forcibly have to have boots at his school. Like he can't just go outside with just normal sneakers on. He has to wear boots. And every time that he is to not wear boots, he ends up getting a mark over his name. Weirdly. So I'd be like, I'm sorry, like, what if kids are poor? Like, are you gonna just ridicule somebody for like their fashion sense? And so Jake is to only have one pair of boots, and these boots are to be these purple, girly-looking boots that every time he is to, of course, put these on, he ends up getting ridiculed by everybody about him. So he ends up going outside, hiding behind this dumpster, and he's wearing these girly boots. And we have this one kid who goes and is to always have this recorder and is to always have these like weird meals for sandwiches, because we have this kid just kind of having like no fear and he really doesn't care about much. And so we end up having Jake forcibly hiding behind this dumpster because of these boots. And so coincidentally, they're all like trying to play this game together, and they of course want Jake to be like another one of their team members. And so the big massive guy Josh is to go and spot like where Jake is, and is questioning why he's back here, maybe seeing some dead squirrel or something like that. But instead he's just hiding behind there because of his boots. And so we end up having, of course, having Josh heckle the crap out of Jake because of his boots. And so they really keep going on and on about these boots in this movie. Consistently, this teacher forces his kid to wear these boots, and so he forcibly does. And then at some point, we end up having a girl who is to have bought, or who had to forcibly buy the same boots just because, like, she's like, yeah, I'm wearing the same boots. So we go on and we have Timmy Part 2, where Timmy is to go on and is to now buy this Power Glove that, of course, is another Nintendo-like thing. It's kind of interesting when we look at this Power Glove, because I think the Power Glove that I think they use here, like, is it the same as the actual original Power Glove, or did they change it somehow? Like, for some reason, I thought, like, this Power Glove looked slightly different than what it was originally, but maybe I was wrong about that. It's been a while since I've seen a video about the Power Glove. And so Timmy is going and now having forcibly people bribe him to now have these people see this Power Glove. And so, since Jake can't go on and get into this house, he conveniently just goes through some other part of this house, seeing there's a doggy door. And so Jake was trying to tempt uh, Timmy to go into his house by just bringing him some kind of salami. And Timmy's like, dude, no, that's gross. So Jake now goes into this house and basically teases this dog with something of meat, and then sneaks into the house via the doggy door to try and watch more of this Nintendo. So we have now Timmy squaring off uh, with one of the young girls playing this NES, and of course, this girl's name easily isn't even in here. I'm assuming it's Tammy because I don't see her here. So yeah, I'm assuming it's Tammy. So Tammy is to go and play this Nintendo, and she is going against, of course, Timmy here, and so they're going at it, and so Tammy is mopping the floor with Timmy with his Power Glove because he's like, yeah, I should be able to do whatever I want. Yeah, I'm gonna beat you, like, and then so he's just getting so upset because he's not able to beat her so easily, and now we realized, and also so does Jake, that the Power Glove was a crappy thing, and that was the reason why people just stuck with none of the huge massive accessories for the NES, was simply because like the other stuff just didn't work out that well. So Timmy, who is now so frustrated that all of a sudden he is to lose his and go and do some kind of Mortal Kombat kick of a thing. Like his whole body ends up lifting into the air, kicking this TV screen, and this TV screen, who of course is a tube TV, ends up falling not backwards, ends up falling weirdly forward, crashing onto this dog, and it didn't murder the dog, but it ended up just making everybody just like, oh my god, let's get the F out of here. I feel like I'm getting in some wrong of language here that I probably shouldn't have, because this is a Christmas film. So all the kids are getting out of this place. They're scrambling out of here. But like also like this channel nonetheless should be catered for adults anyways, but anyways, whatever. It doesn't matter. Whoever sees this is whoever sees this. So because it's YouTube, it's not YouTube Kids. But like people can subscribe to stuff, Anyways, but whatever. Anyway, it's a family movie. It's adults are in the family, right? So whatever. So it's like I think you can cater to families too, so like that's okay. So so we push on here, and of course have everybody scrambling out of this house, and so Timmy, I guess, is to be in hot water. They find out the aftermath of what had happened, that that eventually like the dog isn't dead. It's just like really heavily injured. So we have it where they're of course asking, well, like, do you think there's ever going to be another time we're going to have like Nintendo over by this kid's house? And they're like, no, man, like that's done. Like that, like I think that's done forever. And they're like, oh crap. Well, like now we have to all go and figure out how we can all get a Nintendo. And so everybody's like, yeah. So we now have, of course, one of the kids who is to like. I know they kind of break down like all the kids that Jake is to attach himself to in this story, and they have their own like backstory of who they all are and so on and so forth. We have like the two twins that are to like own baseball cards and stuff like that, and we end up having certain kids with certain like things about them. So we end up finding out that this one kid named Jeff is to seemingly be this pathological liar. And so he is to go on and mention that he was to supposedly be Tom Cruise's stunt double for some movie. And he's to mention all kinds of things that aren't really true. But Jeff is to turn around and is to mention, like, well, hey, like, there is to be this like reselling contest that the winner is to go and get a Nintendo, and they're like, oh my god, like we need to go and sell all these reefs. So evidently this whole thing is to be attached to the Boy Scouts, but I think they ended up having to like conveniently come up with some kind of other like color design or some kind of other outfits that don't make it look like the Boy Scouts, but like it's the Boy Scouts basically. I think they didn't want to like I think they wanted to avoid like having some kind of like suing session happening to just kind of make this look like generic enough to where it's not actually looking like a Boy Scouts outfit. Like I don't think that green is any point of the Boy Scouts outfit, like unless they like drastically changed over the years, but that's like me, I guess. So we have these Boy Scouts going out and going through all these neighborhoods trying to sell these wreaths. And even like certain kids who aren't even in the Boy Scouts are trying to sell these wreaths. Like we have the massive Josh guy who's basically just selling these wreaths and basically threatening anybody that who doesn't buy them to buy them. Because, like, we had the one hilarious moment where Jake is trying to make his first sell, and he used to go to this one guy's house where he already has a wreath on his door. And so Jake is like, hey, would you like a wreath? And the guy's like, oh, so are you selling me something? Like, don't you see a massive sign that says no soliciting? As if this is like 2021. So we have this guy who is to also have this wreath on his door. And so he tells the person he's living with, it's like, hey, like, this kid says that your wreath sucks. And so he slams the door on this kid. So Jake goes through and desperately tries to sell more wreaths, but we find out that Jeff is kind of connivingly like doing better at selling these wreaths than Jake can, because Jeff is basically going through Jake's neighborhood and selling all these wreaths. So, because Jeff is to probably make up all kinds of stuff to just say like, oh hey, like this charity is to go, or this is to go all for charity, and like I'm sure he's to come up with some kind of lie to manipulate people. So it's funny because like Jeff even sells to Jake's own mother, and after like Jake has gone numerous houses and whatever and exhausted himself trying to sell this, and he starts to say that he's kind of getting better and better about it. But there's the one time where he is to go and talk to this old lady, and like she has to forcibly have him like shovel this entire like car out to go and get her wallet to then pay this kid. And I'm like, wow, that's kind of a slide-like thing to force like somebody to do some task for her, but then turn around and probably just like, oh, my wallet I guess wasn't in there that whole time. Oh, we'll give you like a nickel for your troubles, or a quarter for your troubles. So we have Jake, and he is to eventually just go and try to talk his parents into, of course, getting him a Nintendo. We have it where Jake is to put like ketchup all over his shirt and then give his mother the shirt, and now she is to have too many tasks, so she's getting confused about what she's actually saying, or what she's actually doing. So Jake is to ask his mother, like, well, hey, like, do you think that we can get a Nintendo? And she's like, sure, honey. And so uh, eventually we have Jake going to his dad, and his Jake is this like carpenter where every time he's like nailing something or sanding something, or he's doing some kind of carpentry work, something somewhere in his home. Man, that's all I really need for for a guy in his home, to have all these like tools just lying around and he's just like working on his house. So Jake is to go and ask his dad about this, and because he comes up with some kind of like sly way to just have Jake say, it's like, well, hey, like, Dad, since you love working with your hands, like, how about you give me something for Christmas that helps me work with my hands? Because Jake is to realize that his father is to have like really strong hands, and Jake is asking his dad, it's like, well, hey, like, how do you get your hands so strong like that? And so, like, his father was just saying, like, well, I'm a guy who has worked with my hands. Like, mentioning about how he used to go on and build, like, a number of things when he was younger. And so he kept turning around and being that same kind of guy who would just go on and just continue to build things just because of that one childlike experience. So Jake goes on and is to ask his father about the Nintendo, and so of course his father is just like, well, yeah, sure, might as well. So Jake eventually is to go and have dinner, and so like all of a sudden his mother is to go and have this topic about Nintendo and how it's to like warp kids' minds or make them completely forget about any other thing that they are to do, that they'll just spend numerous hours upon hours playing this Nintendo, and their brain will turn into mush and all this stuff. And so all of a sudden now we have his mother that's just like, oh no, I'm out of the whole like buying my kids Nintendo. Luckily we don't even have one of those here. And so Jake is like, what? Like, I just like, I talked to you and you were to say that we're going to get a Nintendo. And then all of a sudden the dad goes and starts squawking. And then he is to say, oh yeah, like, I don't think that we should have a Nintendo either. Like, we have, like, weirdly his dad who is to say that, like, the Nintendo was some kind of, like, code or something like that for some kind of weird, goofy thing. And that is to be, like, code for something or whatever. I didn't think it was actually a gaming console. I thought it was some other thing. And then, like, all of a sudden the dad is coming up with some kind of words to just say, like, yeah, like, I think that gaming console is going to turn your brain to mush. And, like, I think games are way too violent. Violent? Okay. Like, Nintendo games, 8-bit games are way too violent. So John is just like, God, like, I'm never going to get this console. And so all of a sudden his sisters come on by like, hey, guess what? Like, I think I can help you figure things out. But in turn, you have to go and help me, like, convince our parents to get me a Cabbage Patch doll. And Jake's like, okay, I'm listening. So we have his sister, who is to mention that there is to, of course, be this old folks' home that would probably easily have Jake buy up all of these wreaths, and like he'll probably make a killing. And so Jake is like, oh, okay, that sounds like a really good idea, because all the old folks home people have doors on their things, and so why not sell all these wreaths to all these old people? So Jake goes to this old folks home, but like he's to really just starting to realize how like horrific that this whole thing is going to be. How for him to sell one wreath is to have this one woman go on and talk about her whole life story, or we have Jake having to forcibly try and like feed this one guy soup so that way he can go and buy this wreath, and so on and so forth. So Jake is to have this retainer, and he ends up having to take it out when he is to, of course, eat this meal. And his father is like, well, hey, like, we spent a lot of money to have this retainer, like, for you, so how about you eat while having this retainer in, like, your mouth, because it'll probably help you eat better. And his mother's like, that's not how it works. So, because the whole retainer thing for Jake is going to come back around when we get to this store. So, Jake is to now go with his family to this store. And so, of course, Jake is to eventually tell, like, his parents about going on and buying a Cabbage Patch doll, and like how like it's a real like collector's item or some kind of something, to have these parents be like, like, is he like interested in a Cabbage Patch Kid doll now? Like, I don't know, it's all weird. So eventually, like, we have Jake kind of eventually having to come and tell his parents the truth that like really his sister wants a Cabbage Patch doll, and so like that's the real reason why he's continuing to mention it right now. So so we have this girl scrambling to this one toy store to see if there's any Cabbage Patch Kids left, and there isn't. They're all out. And they weirdly have to have this like Cabbage Patch doll logo like behind this janitor guy that's to tell about this horrific story that is like, yeah, like two people just had to like fight to the death for it. It was horrible or something like that. So all of a sudden in this same toy store there's to be this Nintendo display just calling for Jake. And so both his parents are telling like, hey, like watch over your sister while we go off somewhere. Just make sure that you're paying attention to her. And so, but Jake is to all of a sudden have this Nintendo display calling to him, and this display is actually talking to him and saying like, hey, forget about your sister, just like she's irrelevant, like come to me, Jake, come to me. And it's like so like hilarious and consuming, or like seducing him to like come to this whole display, where this whole display thing was probably the funniest part of the whole movie. Like, I didn't really care about anything else. I was just like, man, if this movie would have just had like Jake in this display for a good chunk of time, I would have had a heck of a time in this film. So this display is to try to have Jake just come over and play it. And so instantly when Jake is to play this Nintendo and this display, he's to basically just zone out, and that's all. Like, he's in the zone and all he's doing is playing this game. He drops his retainer onto the ground because he's just so enthralled about this game that nothing else matters, to the point where his sister is probably off doing any number of things. And so Jake is supposedly having like the best game like playing experience of his life, and everybody's kind of like cheering him on, like Jake, 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 like in his probably own imaginary, like thoughts of just like this whole like mall is cheering him on. So all of a sudden, his parents is to go and grab Jake, and it's like, hey, like where is your sister? Like, oh my god, like you were to have one thing, Jake, one thing to do, Jake, and you didn't do it. So, but they eventually find his sister, and they go off and they realize, like, Jake, where's your retainer? And then so Jake is to go off and run back to where this toy store is and find this retainer, which is now brown and gross. And he ends up forcibly putting it back into his mouth. And then his father, who is chasing after him because he's like, like I want to see that you don't have this retainer in your mouth. And once you do, like, I'm going to ground you, because supposedly Jake was to say that this retainer was like the price of some car. And so, like, if this kid doesn't have this retainer in his mouth, he might as well not even come home. So Jake was to forcibly put this retainer back in his mouth, and then his father was to say, okay, open your mouth. And then the kid has the retainer, and he's like, oh, all right, let's go home. So now we push on, and we weirdly have Jake and his father go off to find some, like, shady drug dealer-esh, like, guy who's to be dealing these, like, counterfeit, like, toys. And I'm just like, okay, this movie got really shady. And I thought that was hilarious. So all of a sudden, this guy is to, of course, have these, like, Cabbage Patch dolls, but, like, it's not the, like, the perfect Cabbage Patch doll that that Jake's sister wants, but, like, it seems that at the end of all this, she's happy about it. So, because she wanted, like, red hair and freckles and whatever. So, and they end up finding her, like, a blonde hair doll with freckles. And so, but she eventually is satisfied about it at the end of this film. So, the guys also mentioned that they have a Nintendo in there. And so Jake is, like, asking his dad, it's like, well, hey, like, Dad, can we just at least see the Nintendo? Can we see what it is? Could I just taste the Nintendo? And so the dad is just like, no, like, come on, let's go on. So really now Jake is to be desperate to get this Nintendo, think that nobody in his neighborhood is going to get one. And so now they have to come up with some harebrained scheme to go and try to get this Nintendo. And so it seems that these twin kids are to be avid baseball cards collectors. And so like, also collecting baseball cards is kind of like, man, I remember when, like, originally those things used to be such a massive thing, and now they just say, it's like, well, hey, like, they just keep, like, shoving these things out every single year or whatever. Like, it's, like, to the point of they've just been so overly mass produced that, like, there's no real value in them anymore. It's basically like Star Wars action figures. Like, Star Wars action figures, like, probably don't have as much value anymore because they just keep popping them out every single year. Like, you can probably go and find certain action figures that tie into certain, like, movie events, but you would probably have to go and get, like, the most, like, ridiculously rare, like, action figure of a Star Wars thing to have it hold any meaning anymore. Kind of like a baseball card, you would have to get a very specific baseball card that has a huge high amount of value. So going on, so these kids are to go and find this very rare baseball card. And so evidently they find out that it's a pretty good sized payout for this card, and they're like, hey man, like we should go on and try and sell these baseball cards to turn around and then try to get this Nintendo console, and like that will be like a really good idea. Because we also have Jake, who is to go to these twins' birthday that is weirdly right around Christmas. So you would think that they're gonna get the best of both worlds, where like these kids are having their birthday around Christmas, and you would think a lot of times you'd be like, hey man, you're getting so many presents right around the same time, but in all actuality, it just turns around and has these same people just basically saying like, hey, here's your birthday and Christmas gift that you're gonna have to share between the two of you, and like and so like like so like basically any of these gifts are to basically be uh like whatever like cheapest thing that these people could combine all together for one huge massive holiday, and it just comes off as a ripoff. Just like, that sucks. So because I know there was one kid in my school that used to have like a birthday like right around Christmas. I think his like birthday was like Christmas Eve or something, and we would always like joke about him like, hey man, like you're gonna get a lot of presents this year. And he's like, yeah, it's gonna be cool or whatever. It's like, to him it's just like, meh, it's just like it's right around the same day. Like, what does it matter? So uh yeah, so they go into this plan, and so their plan is to coincidentally have these kids be going on this field trip, and this field trip is to eventually take them close to some mall somewhere, and so that's technically going to be out of town, and because we have it where the parents are all going to this one meeting together, and the one kid who is Timmy's father is to go on and have this slideshow that that this Nintendo had caused this TV to break and to fall onto this dog, and how video games should be game over, and that they should go and ban these video game consoles from being in their stores. And so now all the stores have banned a Nintendo console, so it's not convenient for any of these kids to get this console, because all these parents are mass manipulated that these video games are going to cause a TV to crash onto a dog everywhere that they are to be in a house of, weirdly. So Jake goes off to this mall in this other side of town, I guess, to or this other town, because they conveniently go to this field trip that far. So we have these kids stalling to now have this kid run off with still his purple boots, and to go into this mall to try and buy this Nintendo console. So, because what happens is, like, Jake's to go into this bus, and Josh, the massive bully that he is to go on and try to steal Jake's Trapper Keeper. But then Jake turns around and is to basically threaten this guy to give him this Trapper Keeper, and to tell him, it's like, well, hey, like, my mom bought these boots because they were cheap and she had a coupon and discount or whatever. Like, I hate these boots, but I love my mom. And so, but we have, like, the one girl who's mentioned, like, yeah, I have the same boots. Like, so. But Jake goes on and is to now open the fire exit of this bus, and the alarm is to be muffled by some coat. And so Jake goes off and is to, of course, run out of this bus, because one kid was to stop this bus by power puking. And so this kid is to supposedly have 9 minutes of puke that is to be flying out of his mouth. So, but like, here's the one thing that I'm thinking of. It's like we have the one kid who's to be barfing up a storm, and if I were that kid, I would be like, dude, I did all this barfing for what exactly? Because Jake is to go off and go to this mall and exchange or be able to go and get these video game console things, but he finds out that also there's two parents that are standing in front of this game store trying to tell people to not buy these consoles because it's like it's evil or whatever. So Jake now has one of the kids go into this telephone booth, call to page both these parents. And so all of a sudden this kid turns around and is to mention about buying some other like cousin or whatever, or renting it out or some goofy thing. And this kid is to establish this in Canada. And so at first these girls are like, you know, it's a felony to do this kind of like lie or whatever. And so this kid keeps making up this stuff, and then they continue to buy into it. And he's like, wow, like they actually believe me. Wow, there's never been a single soul of a person that has ever believed anything that I've said. So Jake goes on and is to buy the Nintendo, make it out of the place conveniently before these two parents are to come back. And so Jake is making his way all the way to where this bus is, and to all of a sudden have this bus be driving off, and Jake is to accidentally take the one bag that he has with this Nintendo. It goes flying, and the bus runs over the Nintendo console, and it weirdly does this like explosion like thing to where it's like, what? Like, okay. So all of a sudden Jake is like, oh my god, like this Nintendo is now broken. I no longer have a Nintendo. I'm like, man, are they just like milking the out of this movie? Or it's just like, man, they just continue to just like have it be so close of a thing, but then they tear it away from you. Like it's you getting like, hey man, this is this like brand new great thing, and then this person goes and takes that brand new great thing and smashes it onto the ground and just like jumps all over it, and it's just like, yeah, like, you know, that whole group, that great thing that you got, bam, smash, whatever. And it's like, good God, really? Like, come on. So now Jake is just going on and talking to this dealer, realizing that there's no way for him to be able to get back to this school trip, and like basically his life is over now. And so we just have this dealer who is to tell Jake, it's like, well, you know what, like maybe you should realize that it's not about like the gift, or it's not about like you getting this certain kind of thing. Maybe it's all just like about you just enjoying your family, and just like realize that it's a holiday of family and giving and whatever. And it's like, wait a minute, what? Like, please just don't have this be like a whole moral of the story kind of thing where all of a sudden this kid just turns around and is never going to get this gift. What the so this dealer just goes off and conveniently is to just give this kid cab fare, I guess, to make his way to this bus trip. And so this kid goes back to his class, just like, hey guys, no Nintendo. So all of a sudden it's Christmas time, and so Jake is maybe thinking like, well, anything is possible. It's Christmas time, because maybe we're possibly thinking that maybe this dealer could turn us around and have us realize that he's possibly like Santa Claus all along, and we like didn't know it or whatever. But no, nothing like that happens. So Jake is to be going on and is to be thrusting through all his gifts, like having numerous experiences of going on and unwrapping all these gifts. I know for me personally, I would just like I would hate having to clean up like wrapping paper. So what I was always like my plan was always to do was to go on, and when I was younger, I got to a point where I just grabbed a trash bag, and which I thought was so clever, was so smart. I'm like, yeah, like I'm gonna grab a trash bag and bring it with me and just unwrap all these presents, and like all the wrapping paper would just go in this trash bag. And I was like, yeah, I'm so clever because there's so much like wrapping paper, and I didn't want to go back and clean it all up. So I would just bring the trash bag because it'd just be so easy and so convenient, and I would do it every single year. And so like it got to where I was like, yeah, like I was so smart about that. Because we always needed it. Like it was always like, yeah, I guess this was a smart idea. I was like, yeah, I feel good about that. Like, yeah, like luckily we had trash bags that like could conveniently all like whatever. But like that was my smart genius plan. Like to have so many presents that I would have to fill up this whole bag, and then a lot of times I'd have to go and get another bag sometimes, just because like we would all just conveniently all use this one trash bag. And they're like, ah, like this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. Like, just like, hey, no, like, I'm gonna use my own trash bag. Well, you get your own. So, but as the years go on, like the gifts of course get smaller and smaller and smaller, just because like we don't like we were lucky to get like what we were to get when we were young, and so on and so forth. So to where it's like the years is kind of like, okay, here's one gift, and it's like that's the big gift. It's like, oh, okay, all right. So uh so we go on, and we have this kid who is to, of course, uh, be unwrapping all these presents. And every single like gift he is to get, he is to like see the size of it. They're like, well, that's probably not a Nintendo. That's not a Nintendo. That's not the size of a Nintendo, and so on and so forth. And so there's this one last gift that is to seemingly be the size of a Nintendo. And I'm like, so this is kind of like the Christmas Carol all over again, where the very last gift is to supposedly be the BB gun that the kid unwraps. Spoilers for anybody that hasn't seen the Christmas Carol, like it's a no-brainer movie that the kid is going to eventually get this gift. So all of a sudden, Jake is to see that it's from some like random like family member, like some uncle somewhere, and so that uncle is to have supposedly worked at Nintendo. And so Jake is like, oh my god, this has to be that present, it has to be Nintendo, oh my god, everything is gonna light bright. Frickin' light bright. What? And so like the mom and the dad, like the dad is just like, I thought it was going to be a Nintendo, because yeah, we teased these people to just be like, wah wah wah. Yeah, it was a light bright. The guy gave them a light bright, and I was like, what? So we're not even gonna give them like the actual gift at the end of this? And so even the kid complains about that. The kid who's listening to Neil Patrick Harris's story, and the older Jake. And she's like, what? Like, you didn't get a Nintendo? And so Jake is calling all of his friends and asking all of his friends, hey, did any of you get a Nintendo? And like the one kid is to say that like they got a bike or they got some other goofy present and it wasn't a Nintendo. And so supposedly the only person that was to say was to get a Nintendo was the pathological liar that also said he got a jetpack for Christmas too. And it's like, yeah, whatever. Like, I don't think he got it. So all of the kids were calling and they're like, man, if only we could have gotten that one Nintendo. Like, man, that sucks. So now we just turn around and forcefully have it be that this kid never got this Nintendo, but like the whole importance really of it was that like this is a story about family. And so the kid was like, wait a minute, because both Jake and Anna go off and are playing this Nintendo. And so Anna's like, wait a minute, like, how is it that you got this Nintendo? Like, that's a garbage story. Like, how is it did you steal this Nintendo from somebody? And so Jake is like, no, I went off and I got a job and I worked for it. I worked as a caddy one summer and I saved up to get the Nintendo. And she's like, okay, like, you got it, but still, like, what kind of garbage is that? Like, you had it, like, we have the whole, like, him getting the Nintendo, but it happens off camera. The one goal of the entire film was to just turn around and be something that he got off camera, and there wasn't that story. And that just really just kind of bothered me. Like, man, that sucked. Like, you could have actually had him, like, growing older and older and older, and eventually finally getting that thing and showing, like, by now that he always, like, comes back to it every year and plays it because that was the first ever real thing that he worked his butt off for to get. But we also turn around and have a really father and son moment where Jake was to also find out that his father was also making a thing for him, which was to be this massive tree fort. And so Jake and his dad was to just kind of go into this tree fort, and Annie's like, yeah, like, this whole tree fort thing is actually my favorite thing, I like coming here. And Jake is just like, well, yeah, me too. And because it's always that one special moment of, like, yeah, the kid didn't get a Nintendo, but he'll have a tree fort where they can do a billion activities. And so that's the real payout of this thing of just like, well, hey, the guy didn't get the Nintendo in the end, but he really got to have a thing that always reminds him of his dad and always was a, like, fun thing to go out and do. Because we have both the parents who are going on and telling their kid, well, hey, like, how about you play outside? And so the one kid was had the thing of just like, well, I, like, got hurt or I got sick or something like that by playing outside. Like, I don't want to go and play outside. But they eventually have this tree fort thing that is to seemingly be a thing that the kids can go outside and just kind of play around with. And so, like, technically, like, there was a win coming out of this. That both the father and son just kind of had this bonding moment over this tree fort, and they really loved it. And so we turn around and have, like, both Jake and Annie going back into the house, where of course we now see Jake's mother, who is now a much more aged woman. And so, like, hey kids, come on in and get dinner. And so we have all the kids, or we have all the people going in and eating dinner. And so Jake evidently has his, I guess his wife, ? Present. And so we find out that Jake was to eventually go and tie the knot with some woman that did have the same boots that Jake did. And, like, that's how he eventually got this girl. And so, like, it all comes down to those goofy boots that eventually, I guess, did get Jake a woman at the end of this. So that I guess is a good payout of a story. So they go on and they have this Christmas meal, and we end up finding out that sadly enough, the grandfather is no longer with them, and I guess he had passed away. But it's to always reflect on that one tree fort and to reflect on that Jake was to eventually, I guess, become a carpenter because of his dad. And so that's like the real true happy ending of this story, even though the real true goal like wasn't achieved within this film. It was to just like remember about your dad or your family or whatever, and that might choke some people up because eventually they might have had their dad pass away or their parent pass away fairly recently, and like they could be like very sad about this film because realizing about this story. So, with that said, I think that covers most of this movie, but I'm going to get out of here so I can go on and do something else for today. 8 Bit Christmas, like, not a bad film, but, like, it just, like, bothers me that we didn't get to the actual, like, goal achieved of a thing. Because, like, Christmas Carol and all this stuff, like, you always have those, like, real happy endings where everybody gets what they get in the end. Even in the Christmas Carol, where eventually the kid does go on and shoot his eye out and realizes how a BB gun was a mistake. But he still got the thing. He still got the present. He just shot his eye out. Or just, he broke his glasses. And then uh, he realized what a mistake that gift was. So, with that said, I am going to get the heck out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and whatever. Like, if you don't celebrate any of this at all, then why are you even watching a Christmas movie? But, like, maybe you just needed something to watch at the end of all this anyways. So, goodbye, everybody. Happy holidays, whichever. Like, Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, however you celebrate anything. I don't know why I'm saying this now because it's not even December yet. But But once it does become December, maybe a lot of people will probably watch this Christmas movie even more. So I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.